Hey Bethlehem, this is Pastor Paul. This past Sunday we talked about the importance of our thoughts. The Bible has a lot to say about our thinking. We see this in the Old Testament where God encourages his people to meditate on his purposes, on his ways, on his will, on his word. We see this in the New Testament as well. The Apostle Paul will tell us that we are transformed by the renewing of our mind. He tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 that we are to take every thought captive. He tells us in Philippians chapter 4 verse 8 to think about what is good and noble and pure and kind and honorable and true, that we're to put good things into our thoughts, into our minds. And the reason for this is because our thoughts determine our actions. Our thoughts determine our choices. Our thoughts determine our perspective of the world. Our thoughts determine how we see other people. See, our thoughts determine the direction of our lives. So how do we begin to change our minds and change what we think about? In Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, the Apostle Paul says, "Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory." Paul tells us here that in order to change our minds, we have to take two steps. The first thing we have to do is we have to believe what is real. We have to believe that we have new life, even though at times it doesn't feel like it. He says that you have new life. It's hidden with Christ. You'll see it all in all of its glory at one time. Right now you just get glimpses of it, but believe that is true. And that's the reality of following Jesus. That there are things that are true, but it doesn't necessarily feel true. It doesn't necessarily line up with our experience. So Paul says, no, believe what God has said in his word. Believe God's promises. Let that shape your thinking. And then Paul also says the second step that we need to take is that we have to focus on what is true. We have to believe what is real. We have to focus on what is true. So he says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. What Paul is telling us, that as followers of Jesus, we need to think about the value system of heaven. We need to think about who God is, because we're created in his image. We're citizens of his kingdom. And so we think about love, and we think about what it means to forgive, and we think about what it means to have mercy. We think about who God is, and we think about the fact that God is generous, that God is loving, that God is kind, that he's forgiving, that God is Trinity, that God exists in community. And let those realities, let those truths shape what we think about and how we perceive the world and how we see other people and the things that we do. Our choices determine the direction of our lives. So we need to be sure that the thoughts that we have line up with who God is. And so our big idea is that meditating on God's truth transforms our lives. Meditating on God's truth transforms our lives. So as we bring God's truth into our lives, as we examine it, as we pray about it, as we ask questions about it, as we process it, we let it become part of who we are, and that shapes the choices that we make and the worldview that we have. And so our first step in this is that our challenge is to meditate on Psalm 23. Read through Psalm 23 and think about it. Meditate on different aspects of it. What does it mean for God to be our shepherd? What does it mean for us to lie down in green pastures? Hey, Bethlehem, remember this coming Sunday, September 15th, it's Back to Church Sunday. Invite somebody to church. If you invite them to church, make sure that you invite them out to lunch afterwards. If you see a new person at church on Sunday, invite them for lunch. I hope that you will come. Hope you will invite people. And I'll see you then. God bless.